Hi, everyone. Welcome to FLIRT. So FLIRT is Friday Light Informal Research Talks. We feature Grenfell and external research partners to share their work, and it's a great opportunity to do that. They're always on Friday, and FLIRT is supported by the Grenfell Offices of Research and Engagement. And if anyone is ever interested in participating in a FLIRT, they can reach out to myself, Garrett Richards, or Daniel Nadolny, who are the co-chairs of the FLIRT committee. Today, we are very excited to have Amy Hudson here. She is the governance and strategic planning lead and co-lead negotiator with the Nanatukavut, I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, Community Council, and she is going to be here talking about reclaiming Inuit governance. Just a little bit about Amy, I'm sure she'll also introduce herself, but she recently completed her PhD in the interdisciplinary program at Memorial University. She has a BA from Memorial and an MA from the University of Victoria. She is originally from Black Tickle, a remote island community off the southeast coast of Labrador, and the Nanatukavut, and the traditional homeland of Inuit from this region. And Amy's doctoral research was in the area of Inuit governance and sustainability planning. So welcome, Amy. I'm going to get you to share your slides, and I will stop sharing my screen. Perfect, you're good to go, and you can unmute yourself as well. Oh, awesome. Oh, and just a couple housekeeping things for those joining on Facebook or on WebEx. Following Amy's presentation, you can ask any questions of Amy. They can be put in the chat in Facebook, or you can unmute yourself following her presentation here on WebEx, or you can put it in the chat here as well. So yeah, I'll let Amy go ahead.
Sorry, I was having some trouble unmuting myself.
No problem. I can hear you now. You're all good.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for those of you who are joining, and certainly thanks for the invitation to talk a little bit about some aspects of my doctoral research. As Jennifer just said, I just recently defended my dissertation in October, so not quite over the experience of that yet. So it's nice to get back into the presentation world and keep going forward. Had a lovely defense in Happy Valley Goose Bay, actually, at our main governance building. So it was a great event and a great day. And as Jennifer said, I'm originally from Black Tickle, born and raised there. And in my doctoral research, I really sought out to privilege Indigenous methodologies and knowledge to reconsider and to reconstitute Inuit community governance and to contribute to sustainability planning from the perspective of Inuit. And so my doctoral research was very much a collaborative and community-led project with NunatuKavut Inuit in Labrador, in the area of sustainability and governance. And this was an important area of research in practice, but also conceptually, because throughout history, colonists have really played a dominant role in decision-making with respect to law and order, and as a result, governance and planning has often been negated and marginalized, and has negated and marginalized Indigenous people's lives and Indigenous people's very systems of governance. So this research was really about affirming the collective desire and will of Inuit from this region to govern and to make decisions on their lands and from their own values, ways of seeing, and ways of knowing. And this was important to supporting and creating space for Inuit self-determination efforts to ensure the sustainability of their communities going forward. And so overall, The research explored the multifaceted interconnections between research and Inuit community sustainability planning and governance, where best practices in Inuit research guided a community governance and sustainability initiative, or a Cgsi, in 3 pilot communities in NunatuKavut. And I'll talk about that more in depth in a moment. And the research study also identified key and emerging and ongoing areas of governance priorities for Inuit from this region, as well as some important principles of governance, which I'll also talk about through this presentation. Nanatukavut means our ancient land, and it refers to the territory of our people. It's the ancestral homeland of our people, and our people continue to live on our ancestral lands, connected to the lands, waters, and ice of our people. And this is just a picture of some of our community members across our territory. The study really sought to identify and create pathways to sustainable self-determination, really borrowing from and building on the work of leading Indigenous scholarship in these fields, like Jeff Corntassel and others, and then interweaving with the knowledge and experiences of Inuit from this region. So in part, and as a matter of, sustainable self-determination on our lands, this really is a response to a history of colonization and colonial narratives about Inuit from this region that have often sought to deny and erase Indigenous and Inuit history for the purpose of, control of land and resources and resource exploitation. And it also seeks to contribute to decolonized and anti-colonial scholarly literature, grounded in Inuit perspectives and way of knowing, recognizing that Inuit from this region, their knowledge, their expertise, their contributions, the way they live and navigate the world, are very important contributions to society. It's an important knowledge, and it's an important science that can help us in moving forward in our worlds. And all of this, of course, has implications for sustainability and governance. And so in many ways, this collaborative research was able to contribute to, sustainable self-determination, and in 3 key ways: through research, through Inuit-led planning, and through Inuit governance. And through these various facets, we were able to see and demonstrate that Inuit can lead sustainable self-determination on their own lands. The focus of my discussion today is more centered around the Inuit planning and Inuit governance facets of the research. And sustainable self-determination was supported by the research objectives. So informing, community governance practices with knowledge and strength of NunatuKavut Inuit, creating opportunities for self-determination and cultural revitalization in NunatuKavut was a very important part of how this research was carried out, reclaiming knowledge and contributing to academic scholarship in areas like methods, sustainability, and governance were outcomes of this research. The approach was very much grounded in Inuit realities. Certainly key lessons learned were learned and applied from leading Indigenous scholarship in this area, really building on the work and learning from the work of people like Linda Smith and Deborah McGregor, Jeff Corntassel, Sean Wilson, were all significant sources of inspiration for thinking about how to do research differently, how to do research with, with your own people and your own communities, but with Indigenous people and Indigenous communities in a different way that supports and encourages and strengthens community connections and realities. So in this way, research is not just about the production of knowledge to a desired end, but it's about redressing and countering some of the colonial realities and manifestations of Euro-Western research practices that have continued to negatively impact Indigenous societies. So it was really important throughout this process to ensure that the methods that were used were culturally relevant and that the knowledge and expertise of Inuit themselves guided the research process. And of course, as part of that, validating Inuit knowledge and, as I mentioned, conducting culturally relevant gatherings and opportunities for people to share stories and knowledge about their home and communities and their hopes and their dreams for the future and their culture were all really valuable and important to this work. This work was also very much strength-based. So what that means is that to ensure that the research was done from a place of strength meant that we really focused on working with, again, the knowledge holders, the local expertise, privileging the values and perspectives of the people themselves, and really embracing that as the important fundamental aspects of how to move forward, not just in research, but in decision making. And engaging, whether it be with institutions, other stakeholders, various levels of government and things like that. It was also important that this research be approached from a rights-based perspective. What that means is that as part of the stated intent to redress and some of the colonial harms and the negative associations of research in our lands, on our lands in the past, it was really important for people and for participants to understand that who they are, where they come from, their rights to their lands and their ancestral lands are important and respected through this research. So this research was about affirming those rights, respecting those rights, and moving forward on the premise of those rights, not the denial of those rights. And so this gets us to the Cgsi, the Community Governance and Sustainability Initiative, a little bit. So through this doctoral research, a community governance and sustainability initiative was piloted in 3 communities in Blacktickle, Norman Bay, and St. Louis. And here they are on the map in Southeast Labrador. And so the work of the Community Governance and Sustainability Initiative produced a culturally relevant sustainability planning framework or process. So this planning framework really helped to challenge Euro-Western planning practices that also often negate or exclude Indigenous peoples from the planning process itself. This was evident as well in many of the conversations we had throughout the research process and in talking to community members about how they felt about the state of some of their relationships with outsiders and how decisions had been made and how planning and programs and services are carried out or realized. So it was really important that this work recognize the strengths that communities have, that people have, that local knowledge holders have in being able to carry out planning practice and to make sure that they're a part of the planning process. And this was really achieved by, again, centering and privileging Inuit knowledge, expertise, and priorities as fundamental to sustainability planning, for one, and by approaching community engagement and discussions in culturally relevant ways and in culturally context-specific ways. And really, in order to do this, it's important to really understand the cultural context, history of the people and the lands that you're working with. And so this planning framework demonstrates that there's a significant connection between communities and culture and family. And this planning framework is also dependent. This can only work if we if the values of Inuit and the perspectives and worldviews of the people from the communities themselves are imbued in this process and are a part of this process. So this can't work if it doesn't come from the communities themselves. And then, so just to take you through just a little bit of each of those facets of the planning process. With respect to community knowledge sharing stories between community members. So what this often looked like was either within a particular community or by bringing the 3 pilot communities together in one place to share stories and to talk about the history of the communities, what's been working well in the communities, what hasn't been working so well, and to share stories of challenges and strengths, and to share stories of modern day realities of some of the visions and hopes that people have for their communities. And by sharing these stories, community members were able to connect in areas of similarities, but then gain further understanding in areas of dissimilarities. And they were able to even help each other and to share and begin mentorship between communities. So community knowledge sharing was really important part of helping people to come together and understand each other's realities, because even though all of the communities were within NunatuKavut, it's a fairly vast territory with some communities much more remote than others, and flying in or fly out, so it can be travel between communities can sometimes be challenging depending on the community that you're from. And so this was really important for building reciprocity and respect and understanding. Identifying community strengths was a really important part of this process. So oftentimes when people get together to talk about, things that work well, or things that have gone wrong, or things that, people wish that were different, it can sometimes come from or sound like a conversation around deficits. And it can become very easy to be trapped in this idea of what's gone wrong, what's not working, what we don't have, the limitations of our communities, the limitations of our governments, and responding to community needs and priorities. It can become very much about that type of dynamic. And so one of the significant parts of this process was, okay, yes, creating the space and allowing that space for communities to air that out and have that discussion, but then really having intentional discussions where everyone was aware that we're now going to challenge that type of thinking. We're going to try collectively to think differently together. We're going to focus on what works well. We're going to focus on the assets we have in our communities, the strengths that we have in our communities, the capacities we have in our communities, and we're actually going to map them out. And so that's what we did. We started mapping out community assets in the area of culture, finance, social, a range of various assets and communities. And then we did this work more intensively within each of the 3 pilot communities, so that further input was gained around community assets. And then we were later able to reflect these assets and connect them to some of the priorities and goals that communities would go on to later identify, connecting the skills and capacities that already exist, making the priorities and goals seem less daunting and more achievable. So that was a really important and a huge strength-based exercise that was executed throughout the research. But one of the outcomes, of the strength-based work was why I love our community booklets. And these are a great example of community pride and connection and strength, and really help to convey and express the strengths that people see in their communities. And so community members in each of these communities were invited to submit in poem or writing or paragraph, whatever they wanted, what it is they value most about their communities, a deep, enduring connection to place, reflecting, important and strong values around community. I guess you can say you wouldn't want to go in there and disrupt that type of relationship between human and the land, or animals and humans and the land, through big industry or something like that. Just an overarching thought. And then throughout the process, we were able to also, oh, I skipped one, sorry. Connection to community and culture, right? So throughout this whole process, and strengthening community capacity. So throughout this whole process, it was really important that we contribute to community, and that it wasn't just about lead and leave, often indicative of, you know, outsider research relationships, where it can be challenging for researchers, for various reasons, to maintain or sustain relationships with Indigenous communities, or sometimes there isn't that intent to do that type of work. Whereas, so we wanted to make sure that, and keeping with the principles of strength-based and rights-based, we wanted to make sure that the way we did research and the way we carried out this project in communities helped to further communities' capacity to lead these types of initiatives on their own, and to do this work on their own terms. So we work with the pilot communities to identify gaps or limitations that they felt existed within the community, because even though we're doing strength-based work, there's always room to learn and grow and to adapt. And so communities were identifying things like proposal writing, navigating stakeholder relationships. Proposal writing was big, because understanding that writing proposals and planning proposals, depending on where those are going to, whether it's to a not-for-profit or various levels of government, can be a very different skill set. So we did proposal writing work, and a range of different activities with communities, taught asset mapping and things like that. So communities were able to ideally lead from beginning to end, whether it be a proposal or a planning process. Of course, this is just the very beginning, and I look forward to continuing to develop and do that type of work within our communities. That's a really important part of ensuring that community members lead efforts on their own terms. And connections to community and culture is an important part of planning that ensures that the responsibility of planning actors, in one sense, you know. While I'm from the territory, I guess as a researcher, I'm also a little bit of an insider outsider, particularly in the communities that are not my home community. So it was important that I acted in such a way through the research relationship that validated participants' connection to their culture and to their community, and that this was seen, and that these connections and their reconnections and that their pride, like in those booklets, were validated and appreciated and integrated, more than integrated, that were the foundation for how we move forward and understand each other and do this planning work. And so throughout this whole process, there was the identification. We were able to work with these three communities to identify some short, medium, long-term sustainability goals and priorities, and they were diverse and varied over the three communities. In some cases, implementation on some of the priorities began and was finished during the research project. In other cases, they were begun, and in some other cases, I mean, I think they still exist as ways that NCC, as the governing organization, the NunatuKavut Community Council, continues to work with our communities to help fulfill these visions. So just to give an example of some of the outcomes, some of the stated goals and priorities that came out of this collaborative work with communities, health was an overarching priority area, and so food security, water security, those were things that came up to various degrees in the communities as a matter of importance for securing and sustaining good health incomes, along with other opportunities as well, like vegetable gardens, and those types of opportunities. But certainly water security and food security were were significant and looked different across the three communities as well, with the most severe water security reality being in my home community in Black Tickle, because there's actually no water and sewer system in the community, and the only potable drinking water source is a potable water drinking unit that's located. It's not necessarily fully accessible, nor is it consistently operational. So a lot of important basic health goals and priorities, shall we say. Education was also a priority and a goal, and early on in the research, I remember just being really humbled and confused by education in this context. No longer confused, increasingly humbled by it. But when in the work with communities, and community members are talking about, after we did some intentional dialoguing and knowledge building around what sustainability means to us, what sustainability means in each of our communities' contexts, and education was arising as a very important sustainability goal and priority. And I was thinking to myself, going home, doing the reflective notes and journaling, and thinking, education, like, how is that going? Like, where's the economic stability in that? Where's the job creation? And my mind was really, I guess, stuck in this idea that sustainability right now had to be about creating jobs and other opportunities. But of course, education is a priority, because education in the context of educating teachers that can come home and teach kids in culturally context-specific ways, but also prioritizing intergenerational education and the importance of stories as a form of knowledge translation that connects youth and community members and elders together, and that passes on the knowledge and traditions of our ancestors, were increasingly topics of priority and interest. And even as it relates to being able to survive on the land, or to hunt, or to harvest, or to be able to navigate the land effectively for these purposes, were significant and important sites of knowledge for people that were important. And of course, that makes sense, because in this context, the sustainability of our communities and our societies is more than their economic viability, but it's the continuation of a people's culture and connection to ancestors. Very important goal, priority. Then in infrastructure, there's a lot of priorities and goals that really reflect the inequity that many of these communities face in relation to a lot of areas in Canada. So whether it's with respect to water services, or basic infrastructure needs around transportation, health infrastructure, even buildings or facilities to support gatherings and internet and things like that. So there were a range of infrastructure gaps, limitations, deficits, if you will, that were identified. And some of these NCC has been working closely with communities on to rectify. So there's been some good positive outcomes to that end. So economic development did arise as a goal and priority. People understand that being able to have jobs in our communities are important, so that we can continue to live in our communities, so that people can continue to raise their children on the lands of our parents and grandparents and ancestors and so forth. And there were a lot of innovative ideas. I have to say, a lot of innovative ideas that were really community and land-based, that really reflected the deep connection people have and the knowledge people have of the lands around them, and the relationship between people and the natural resources. And so a lot of like a seal, for example, I remember one idea that came up, which was completely practical and doable, really, was around seal tannery, and using the resources in the community physical built resources that already exist, but also given the fact of the lucrative rich seal opportunity for seal industry in that specific community, that those things were a reality. And same thing with berry processing, like bake apples or other berries, and tourism opportunities. All of these ideas were not they weren't elaborate ideas, and with the right supports and partnerships are doable. And then governance, governance and building and reconstituting governance was an important part of the research and an important priority for the communities. And that's not necessarily at all disconnected from sustainability planning, but rather it builds on it, where sustainability planning can be understood as an expression of self-governance. So through the collaborative research with Inuit in this region, we realized, I guess, 4 thematic areas of governance importance to people today. I should note, though, these are not exhaustive, and it's important to realize that, community priorities often change, and people have to adapt and evolve very quickly to changing realities around them. So these aren't fixed in stone, but they are, I think, very important. They do capture broad priorities and interests as it relates to Inuit governance. So firstly, place-based decision-making, very important. Overwhelmingly, people make clear that for reasons related to, local knowledge, expertise, priorities, ensuring that decisions that are made are respectful and are aligned with the way people live in their communities, the way that they want to continue to live in their communities, that align with, cultural traditions and all of those facets of community life, that decisions that are made really must come from the knowledge and expertise of the people who live there, because ultimately they're accountable for the future, and the people that live there are going to be most impacted. So place-based decision-making, the idea that we make decisions for ourselves that impact us, was very apparent and not surprising, given a long history of resiliency and adaptation from people in this area. So very, very important consideration, and will have significant implications, I'm sure, and I hope, for Inuit governance building. The idea that health and governance are interconnected. Another thing that surprised me a lot was it was difficult to, not difficult as in a challenge, but it was surprising to see and be a part of conversations around governance that were fundamentally imbued with concerns and priorities around health. It became very apparent that our communities can be healthy and will be healthier when we are a part of our governance, when we are leading our communities, when we are making our community decisions, and when we are able to exercise governance in our communities in a way that respects and aligns with the needs and priorities of our communities. Health and governance were very interconnected, are interconnected. Education, again, a very important governance consideration and theme in this research. The idea, I expressed it before, the idea that, of intergenerational education, knowledge sharing, storytelling as vital components of educating future generations, so that we can continue to live on our lands, so that in some cases, it would actually be hard to survive on our lands and in our communities without the local knowledge and expertise, given harsh weather conditions and viability sometimes of transporting in basic goods and services. Just as an example, navigating in storms, all of these types of things. So education is very important, but people also see a place for more formal sites of education, but contend that the infusion of Inuit education into our classrooms must happen. That children must see themselves reflected in what they're learning. And this was an important learning within this research, and it continues to be an important learning in other ongoing research that I'm a part of with communities from this region. Relationships to the lands, waters, and ice. These relationships are important, and respecting these relationships and adhering to the protocols that are a part of these relationships are a huge part of governance and imbuing the decisions we make and how we do things with our priorities and our expertise. And it's a big part of how we are and will exercise our own forms of governance on our lands. These are some quotes that demonstrate, I think, fairly well some of those key areas. The idea about making decisions that impact our own communities speaks to theme one. Once we're gone, the stories will be gone. That's an important connection to theme 3 around education. Family being linked to the desire to live off the land and sea is reflective of theme 4. And theme 2, health and governance interconnected. This is just a quote that shows that deep connection between health and governance in our communities. So from all of the opportunities for learning and growing and even increasing my own understanding around governance priorities and community realities in our territory, 2 key principles of Inuit governance materialize. And these principles really reflect the interconnected and holistic way that people live and live on our lands within our communities, and really demonstrates that governance must consider all facets of life and relationships. So I guess from a practical perspective, it's my hope that these principles will be used to guide governance development and or can be utilized, I guess, or can be built upon even to guide governance developments and governance models and structuring and all of those things, because they do reflect and are imbued with a lot of the values, perspectives, and knowledge that was learned and shared throughout this research. So number 1, the idea that governance is relational, the idea of accountability to the past, the present, and the future was an important outcome of this work. And this principle seeks to ensure that governance processes are really informed with the knowledge, the values, and expertise of Inuit. Participants also see a role for being responsible and accountable in their communities, to their lands, to their relations, to the environment, to the animals. So all of these things are important for moving forward and for guiding governance in a way that transforms our communities, but directly challenges Euro-Western governance tradition and practices as well. So this type of governance really demonstrates, is reflective of a commitment to living on the lands of our ancestors, as opposed to governance that comes from the outside, or governance imposed from outsider perspectives or biases or interests. And then governance being intergenerational, gender balanced, and shared. Again, deep connections to place, articulated and understood and learned over and over again throughout this research, demonstrates that Inuit are best suited to guide and lead discussions on their lands. An interesting point in this one, though, is that Inuit women really are integral and have been integral to ensuring the traditional knowledge and stories are passed on. They often seem they're often the ones who mobilize a lot of the social events and social facets of life in communities, and these are often important sites of knowledge translation. And women played a majority role in this research as well. Of course, this does not mean to diminish the role of Inuit men, but helps to acknowledge the role and contributions of Inuit women today, and particularly in light of the fact that in our history, through scholarship and academia and these avenues, Inuit women were largely marginalized and ignored, and that led to misunderstandings of our very societies and of our culture. So hopefully these principles of governance can be used to help guide the work that we're doing and to be built upon, or to help us gain even deeper understandings. So, sustainability and planning and governance, both conceptually and practically, are important considerations for understanding, for learning and growing. And these particular teachings from Inuit are substantive and integral sources of knowledge and expertise that are important not only to our people and communities, but to society as a whole. These are, just to end, these are a couple of quotes where people are really talking about the importance of, their own forms of governance and why it's important to make decisions on our own lands. So humbling that when we talk about governance and sustainability, it's so clear that people make all these connections to culture. The idea of keeping our culture alive is such a huge facet of sustainability. It's a wonderful validation for me too, as I continue on this learning journey through research. So thank you. That's the end of the presentation. I'm open to addressing any questions or comments you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. This was incredibly informative. I really appreciated it. We have a couple questions on Facebook. So I'm going to give one question from Facebook, and then anyone in the group here can also ask a question. So the first question I had was from Garrett Richards on Facebook, and he said he recently read a PhD thesis that looked at the potential integration of asset mapping and sustainability indicators. Were sustainability indicators used in any of these cases, or would that feel like an over quantification of the issues?
I think the use of sustainability indicators are a next step of this type of research. So what this research did through the Cgsi, cognizant of and aware of, the sustainability planning science and literature, was the point and the goal was to really establish a process, a framework to guide sustainability discussions, to even create a foundational knowledge base and a foundational reality whereby Inuit in our communities could even be could have the space to kind of reclaim, okay, we can actually talk about this, we can do this, we can participate in sustainability planning. So this phase of the research was really about creating that space and creating that process to make that happen. And so I think a next phase of work and would certainly not dismiss, the sustainability science literature, but would seek to integrate the supportive and relevant aspects of sustainability science with Inuit science and knowledge.
Awesome. Does anyone here have a question that they would like to ask? They can unmute themselves. If not, I have another question from Facebook.
Paul has a question there, I see.
Hi, yeah. Well, thanks, Amy. This was really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing your research. Yeah, my question is about some of the, getting a better sense of the voices and those community roundtables and discussions you had You sort of alluded to at the end the importance of women and probably in some of those discussions. And so maybe on two levels, what methods did you use to try to capture different people in the community, women, youth and elders, was that an explicit strategy, or did you just welcome people and people show up? So could you tell us a little bit about that and about the different voices, including, women, youth and elders and how that played out?
Yeah, and so I can definitely share. Thanks, Paul. I can share some of that with you. So with respect to methods, there were, a diverse set of methods that were used to capture, to do just that, to capture, understanding the need to capture a range of voices across communities, a range of, to ensure that, we are reaching out to various peoples, various knowledge holders, to capture, male and female voices, elder voices, and things like that, where it was important. But the approach I took was less so in targeting, was less about targeting specifically. Okay, I want to target women. I want to target this generation or what have you, and was more about employing culturally relevant research methods based on, fairly well entrenched understandings of the community, knowing that people have different roles to play and people hold particular knowledge. So some of the methods included the regional workshops I mentioned, where representatives from all three communities came together to talk about this stuff and do this work. In that particular space, communities themselves were involved in identifying who was relevant and who should attend those workshops. So I wasn't particularly involved in that piece. It was up to the communities to select who they felt should be at that, be in those spaces. Then there were community visits and community gatherings where the entire community was invited to come out and participate in cultural activities, in sports. Remember, we had a bonfire in Black Tickle and a full family and youth event day there, and where everyone talked about what they value, the important aspects of their community. So that really reached, and a lot of stories were shared and knowledge shared and translated. So that really reached the whole gamut of the population. Surveys were used to collect some baseline demographic data across a range of peoples in the community. The Why We Love community booklets were open to anyone to submit in writing what they love about their community. Gosh, I should have kept up the method slide. I think there was like 7 various methods that I used. But anyway, the methods themselves were geared towards ensuring, at best, the inclusion of diverse populations within our communities. The different voices were certainly, women's voice really arose and as the pronounced, I think, and dominant voice in most of these discussions. That was a very interesting result and outcome of this research, and one that was not fully explored in this research, but I think is an important contribution for further research. And it's important to remember too, that the way that stories are shared and knowledge is shared within our communities, if someone is telling a story about something that's important, an event, a practice, a protocol, that story, that knowledge that's shared doesn't begin and end with that person. That has come from other people or other generations. So even in that method of storytelling, the stories that are being passed on do come from their intergenerational stories. So yeah, the methods were really just geared towards ensuring opportunities for people to share their knowledge and expertise in diverse ways, understanding that sometimes standard interviews, which were done in this case not the greatest use of time, are not fully able to capture the way that knowledge is translated in Indigenous communities.
Thanks. So there's one more question on Facebook, and then I see Jeff has a question here in the chat on WebEx. So this one's from Stephen Decker, and he says, I really like the strength and rights-based focus of your work. I see connections with participatory action research and social learning here. Given the engaged nature of your research, do you see any evidence of your work contributing to the affirmation or further development of the community-led research ethics oversight processes of the NCC?
So that's the part of the research that I didn't present on today. If I understand correctly, Stephen, you're asking if the research approach to this research has informed or the research governance process or the research ethics process at NCC in any way, I think.
Yes, yeah, I think that's it. Yes. Any contributing to any further development, yeah.
Right. Okay, so those things were, when I was doing my research, I was manager and then director of research education and culture. And so one of my early mandates was to establish a research governance process building on NCC had already had a research ethics process that guided research applications and to some extent research conduct in our territory. So there was something there already to begin with. But so one of my mandates was to further build on that work and to establish a governance process. So that was done simultaneously with this research, and really the research governance process that we do have at NCC today was informed from the work of my doctoral research in collaboration with Inuit. So it has my doctoral research has directly impacted and informed research governance at NCC to the extent that we now have a research governance process that also includes research ethics, but we do have a process, and we are continuing to build on that process as we move forward. Yeah.
Awesome. No, thank you. And then the question here from Jeff says, so interesting, Amy. I'm so glad that the real progress is being made with the Nanatukavut reality. I realize you are limited by provincial boundaries, but is there any contact with those on Inuit land in Quebec, such as St. Augustine? And that's in the chat here.
I mean, I think, through the Research Education and Culture Department and other departments at NCC, that engage in research, there are lots of diverse relationships with the researchers at NCC, with other Indigenous groups, including Inuit, on various portfolios. Some of them more natural resource based or conservation based, those types of things. So there's a lot going on here, but specifically to St. Augustine, no, there's been no, not from my perspective within the research portfolios that I'm aware of, but I should be aware of them because up until recently I was on the research advisory committee, so none specifically there, but certainly lots of at least right now, but lots of research partnerships with diverse Indigenous groups across the province and within the country, and certainly something we're always open to doing, building and furthering relationship building with different Indigenous groups, but also with academic institutions and good research partners.
Awesome, thanks. There's no more questions on Facebook. I think we have time. We're almost at 1:30. We have time for maybe one more question if someone here has one, but otherwise, I think we're ready to go. But thank you so much, Amy, for this. If anyone had another question, they can unmute themselves. But no, that's all right. This is really informative. This is such a great research project, and it was great to learn more about it.
Well, thanks for having me and for helping me get over my nerves of I just remembered that this was being recorded live. So
Can I make a plug, Amy and Jennifer? Amy
Yeah.
Hudson's going to be doing another talk and will visiting us in Corner Brook as well, but on the NTC research process and governance on December 1st, I think. If anyone's interested, stay tuned and we'll let you know more details on that.
No, that's definitely something to plug. Yes, you're coming to Corner Brook in a few weeks. So yes, that would definitely something that everyone here should be aware of because they can see you in person maybe or somehow. Socially distanced, of course.
yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today and on Facebook. And it was so great to have everyone here. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all next week for a 3-minute thesis FLIRT.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.